over, and just as he came very close to me, next to this field I was standing by, out came this cloud of insecticide. It was a crop duster. Filled the air all around me with insecticide, and the other guy standing there. I held my breath as long as I could, which wasn't long enough. And I don't know how much damage was done permanently to me there. Then they introduced me at one point to Oliver Angel out there in the Central, with who is the guy that watches the signals coming from the various microphones distributed around amongst the farms that they'd been able to con the farmer to letting them put their microphones in. And Oliver could tell by looking there at the display whether or not anything amiss was going on at any one of these microphones. And up at Modesto, he was watching all the microphone signals as the airplane was making its repeated runs, and suddenly one of them looked bogus. I guess it went blank, zero. And turns out that they had strung some of this microphone wire across a public highway, and a highway patrolman had come by and spotted this, and he looked in his book of rules, and wires are not permitted across highways without permits. And there was no permit he knew of, so he took out his wire choppers and chop! There went our noise test from that mic. So they dispatched a truck, found the broken wire. I guess they found the highway patrolman, and he lectured them for not having a permit. And they quickly arranged a permit. Is that right, somehow? Got a permit? You don't remember that? They got a permit, I think. And hooked the wires back and resumed testing. And then, not very long after the echoes of the police car had disappeared and the wires had been repaired, here comes along a crew, highway crew with macadam. They're resurfacing the road. And they covered the wire up completely with macadam, and I understand that didn't do anything to or for our noise signals. Last two stories I'll tell you about was when they got me up to Toledo, where really up right in Boeing's backyard, lots of water molecules, and the runway was of unknown strength, so the crew was flying the airplane out of Portland and coming up and coming down over the runway, leveling off at a low altitude, and then punching the power and beginning their climb to measure the noise off the end of the runway, since we were studying at that point only the takeoff noise. And those of you who may have been to Toledo will remember how beautiful an area that was, a pastoral scene, lovely fields, millions of Christmas trees in the forest, and there was a pleasant farmhouse right off the end of this runway that had previously been exposed only to the soft lowing of cows and the sound of 145 horsepower Cessnas. So when our first pass went over that house, and we hit that house with 32,000 pounds of thrust, it created severe consternation in the house. There was no control tower on the field, but there was a flight service station, and not too long after the first run, somehow I happened to get over into the flight service station, was chatting with the FAA guy tending the microphone, giving en route noise or en route information to transient aircraft. And in comes this agitated woman. She was a mean-looking woman. And she was Mrs. Robb, who lived in that house, and she was complaining about, she was in the house, this airplane came over, tremendous noise level, and this is the airplane we're certifying, you understand, tremendous noise level, and her husband, who had a very nervous heart condition, just about keeled over from heart exertion, and she had a parakeet that went completely wild and reverberated from walls of his cage, losing a lot of feathers in the balance. And she was really outraged and chewing on this FA guy. And he said, "There's the guy right there." And she said, "Well, I read in the paper this thing was supposed to have a muffler." So I said, "Well, ma'am, you have to bear with us. The government requires we make these tests, and we'll be through in just a few runs, and we'll be out of here, and hope you'll bear with us, etc." And she stomped off mad. So the guy told me, the FAA guy said, "Now that was Mrs. Robb. She was in an automobile accident recently and had one of these collars on for whiplash, and she kept it on for 2 years until the case was settled." So I figured we'd be in for a lawsuit for Mrs. Robb, but we never did get one. Last story was the company felt it was desirable to have me go off and tell some of the outraged neighbors around airports what we were doing to quiet airplanes down, and that was quite an experience. Probably the most picturesque was the one over at Los Angeles, when the Southern California Association of Governments was looking for a new airport site to accommodate all the growth in traffic expected. And there is lots of cities impacted by noise. A person who is a professional complainer and goes to all the anti-noise meetings and so forth can't remember this particular lady's name. I think might have been Liz. We'll say Liz. And I was kind of warned about Liz, and sure enough, she was in my audience as I was explaining these great things acoustics was doing. And during the course of when I came to the question and answer period, she got up and said, "Mr. Pendley, I want to know, why don't you people make these airplanes so they go straight up and keep all the noise right over the airport?" And I thought, how do I explain to this woman about thrust of weight and so on and so forth? And I don't know that I gave her too satisfactory an answer. But then later, she came up to me personally after the meeting and said, "Now, Mr. Pendley, I have no complaint with you people in the aircraft industry. I know you're trying to do all you can." Said, "But what bugs me is these pilots who fly the airplanes." Said, "They can fly those things a lot quieter if they just would." She said, "Now, you take a good, conservative, middle-aged pilot. He can fly these things in over my house very quietly. But you take these young bucks who are eager to get the airplane on the ground and jump into bed with one of the stewardesses, and they make all kinds of noise." She said, "Just the other night, I heard this quiet airplane come in, and it was making very little noise, and I called the tower, and I said, 'Tell me, was that last airplane that just flew over flown by a conservative, middle-aged pilot?' And the tower said, 'Yes.'" Well, Ed, I want to thank you for having gotten into some of these remarkable experiences, and I want to congratulate you on your retirement and tell you how much of an inspiration it's been to all of us who've worked with you, the way you've demanded logic of yourself and all of us, and best wishes always.
Thank you, Bob.
Our next speaker, we're back to the testing organization, is Lee Barber. He's currently the director and test divisional program manager on the C-17. He has shared plenty of time with Ed, and I'm sure can report on his experiences. Lee?
Hi, Ed. Glad I'm finally got to meet you tonight. I was a little bit late. I'm sorry.
That's good.
By the way, I love your picture.
Yeah. So do I.
Yeah, that's nice. Marilyn, how do you do? Ed, I don't have the kind of stories that Bob. I don't know if I even want to talk about some of the stories like Pendley had, but I do have a couple of comments I'd like to share with you. I was able to get a hold of Ed's bio today to refresh my memory of where he came from and what were some of the things that we were involved with. And it turns out that Ed and I worked together for quite a few years, more years than I realized. I don't know, time went fast or something, but
Time went fast.
must have. I don't know where it all went, but somewhere in the order of 12 years or something that we've been pretty close together. Either he working for me or I'm working for him, like, I don't know. Like John said, you sometimes can't tell. But I know during the period that we were associated, Ed did well with the company, with the organization. He was provided some advancements, and I do know, as a matter of record, that along with the positions and the advancements, that he was well rewarded salary-wise. As a matter of fact, I was looking into the records today, and just during the period that he worked with me, or I worked with him, whatever it was, his salary went from $1,950 to $2,800 a week. Oh, no, I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. That it must be 195 to 280. I guess that was it. I don't know.
I've got a better computer than that.
Well, I apologize again. That's still not right. I think what it is it is the 1,950 to 2,800, but that's what he owed the company, rather than that's what the company paid him. You know, there were a lot of years in there where Ed was really going after a lot of equipment, if you recall. You remember when he was putting together his laboratory, and I think that's probably where I got these numbers from, is what he was paying the company for all the equipment he was getting.
Master
Now, for a few seconds, I'm only going to take a few seconds because I really don't have that much material. I was told to hold it to 2 minutes. In my condition, I can't hold anything for very long. But I'd like to, if you want to listen, you can listen to me, but I'm going to talk to Ed for a minute and see if we can't relate some of our past experiences. Specifically, one experience is the only one I want to talk about, Ed, and I'll never get it, from my memory of the time that we went out to collect data. And just between Ed and I, we went out to collect PMLM, PMLT, EPNL, OASPL. Remember those days, Ed? And they all took that, and we turned it into EPNDB. Beautiful. Wasn't that fun, Ed? Huh? Wasn't that fun? Damn. And we did all that, if you remember, we did all that using the MALT, the CISA, the CORTAS, the TSAS, and the SAFS. Now that's really when the fun began. Oh, one more thing, and we used a BOAT. BOAT, you say? Boat, you bet. We used a boat, of all things, NAFAC, Atlantic City, New Jersey, doing flyover noise tests. Ed and Ollie, bless his heart, had to get a boat. In fact, I think you bought it, didn't you?
On the spot.
On the spot, he bought a boat because he needed a boat. I'll tell you, and Bob, you appreciate this, a little bit of grass, a little bit of moisture. Went out and bought a boat to get to an island on a lake that had the right location, the right, grass, humidity, and everything, to put a microphone. Those were the days, huh? Congratulations, buddy.
Thanks, Lee. Our next speaker is another longtime associate of Ed's and worked many years with him during these trying period of learning how to develop and measure flyover noise. I'd like to have Ernie Lauder come up.
We took all the stories away.
Well, you didn't take all the stories away. There's too many stories about Ed to take away. I worked for Ed 21 of my 27 years. And one thing about him that's been remarkable, he uncannily has a way to remember everything I forgot. And that was really a gift as a boss like that. If I had a complete plan laid out for how to do a test on the airplane, if I forgot to take the tape schedule or get that plan put together, Ed would say, "Is the tape schedule ready?" I said, "Oh, I forgot." It's the only thing I forgot out of 100, but Ed remembered somehow. And we had a complete flyover noise test plan. Everything's all squared away and coordinated. It says, "We got a place for the weatherman to stay." No, forgot that one. So then I got an EMA coordination in the last couple of years, had everything all planned, everything all set up again. He says, "You have a copy of that to the EMA engineering coordinator?" I said, "No, I forgot that." And that was the gift he always gave to me. He was precise, as you could hear from all these stories. And one thing that nobody said was he left notes everywhere on everything to show it was working or not working and where it was and what it was. We go on a flyover noise test, there's a sign on everything, and they're all in Ed's handwriting. He'd take these damn signs, he'd put them everywhere. That damn sign, just beer bottle, what you get? And so, you got to have one of these. I almost did that. But we have a lot of copiers that work, and they hardly ever work, and there's a light on the copier out there by Larry Crowley's desk, and that light doesn't work, and what's on that light? A sign that says doesn't work, and guess who wrote it? But those things all paid off. One what was it that, oh yeah, the idea about equipment. Ed got more equipment bought for a small group than anybody in that company. Cost per capita, his outranked everybody's. He was tenacious. He kept equipment. People, I can't get away from the guy. I've been working here 27 years. I'm the only person in the company that worked for the same man 21 years. So tenacious. Equipment, people, ideas. Man, he hangs on ideas. He doesn't have his own. He gets everybody's ideas, and he keeps them all and puts them together. So that you get to keep also. A tenacious person. And right now we have a lot of things going on in what we call new culture, and that's to empower people to do their job. You heard that song about it was country before country was cool? Ed was new culture before culture was cool. I remember a job, John Hand gave me a job, and it scared me to death. I wasn't too old of an engineer at that time, to coordinate and solve all the noise and vibration problems on the DC-10. Remember that one? And I was shaking in my boots. I even wore boots then, I still do. And I didn't know how to handle it. It was too much for me, and I really was scared. I didn't know how to go about that awesome task. And Ed, the kind of boss he was, I could go in there, and I told him, I said, Ed, I'm scared, I'm spinning my wheels, what do I do? He helped me see the qualities and the talents I had to solve that problem, and I went out empowered, and that's the kind of boss he is. And I was empowered enough I hit up a lot of flyover noise programs, and you've heard about those, I'm not going to recount them, but boy, I went out there empowered to do the job, and every went with RG58 cable. That raft you heard about, it was moored to the shore with RG58 cable. There's lines all over NAFEC and Atlantic City, New Jersey, and any state you can think of in the Union, RG58 cable, so you got to have some of that stuff. And you heard about him looking ahead to the future. I've forgotten who shared it, but the idea that he saw flyover noise having a need long before the rest of the people did. He had a PC on his desk when people thought it was a game. And they laughed at him. That's all people did. What do you got that for? Now everybody wants one. So, he is definitely visionary. And, and one thing he taught me, a lot of things he taught me, but one thing was, a lot of things come to you fixed. You get dealt a hand or you get certain things, and how you arrange them is up to you. That's what a kaleidoscope does. There's certain things in there that's given to you, but what it looks like and what it's going to become is up to you. And Ed taught me that. He's visionary, and I thank him for it. I guess out of all those things, I'm a better person in every way I can think of. I'm more professional. I'm more precise. I'm a better husband, a better father. I'm a better citizen because of Ed. And I thank you.
Well, this next speaker is an interesting one also, and it's particularly interesting to me since he's one of the other branch managers in my organization, and he just happens to head up the essentially the computing operation in test engineering. And as you heard, Ed is a keen aficionado of those devices. And it's interesting to hear the conversations that go on between Ed and our next speaker, Larry Crowley, who has the responsibility for that. And you might have gathered Ed has some opinions sometimes. And like I say, it's a very interesting experience managing these two folks. Larry?
I have a few things to say, and I don't want to talk about noise at all. Nothing to do with noise. I promised Ed a roast tonight, and I think we ought to have a little roast. The easy, or Ed, that we've all come to know, wasn't always so easy. And Ed, whether you know it or not, at one point in time, for some period, you were a real pain in part of the posterior. I began dealing with Ed somewhere in the mid-'60s when I somehow got involved, mistakenly probably, in an IRAD project. And Ed was considered the IRAD expert. Actually, he was the kind of the chief buggy. he would bug you and nag you about certain aspects of those IRAD projects. Good advice, I'm sure, but boy, it was tough to take then. He was very precise in those days. He had kind of a built-in leather-bound thesaurus that always had the right phrase, and he'd keep selecting it, you know, to extreme. But, you know, he was very good in the details, particularly in the IRAD areas. Those were the days when we had Andy Mayhoff and Verlin Marth and Ed. And for those of us like myself who are more inclined towards a poetic type of writing, you could really drive you crazy with the way he wanted you to write those reports. But there was another side of Ed, or a kind of a real side. I ran into Ed and his family, Maryland, I believe, on the trails in the San Gabriel Mountains, I think it was, hiking. And he was a different person there. He was a real person. And you know, with the babbling brooks and the wind blowing through his hair, something like that, I think it was. Yeah. Poetic, very poetic, yeah. He's, another side of Ed is this high-tech, very sophisticated person that he is. You wouldn't believe the corn that he likes, and it isn't vegetables I'm talking about. I don't know how many of you may have heard of a radio broadcast called Prairie Home Companion. Anybody here heard of Prairie Home Companion? A few of us have, I think, yeah. This guy really digs on Prairie Home Companion. He recently the guy who runs that, you're right, the guy who has that radio show broadcast live from St. Paul, Minnesota, finally retired from that show, and you see what's happened to Ed. He's given it up too. I think it was more than he could take, really. Marilyn, you've heard about, and you know about Ed's love affairs. You probably don't know about profs. Now, profs is a thing that Ed really loves, and I don't know how he's going to get along without it. I've seen it in the last week, and he's gotten very temperamental since Cappy took his PC away from him. But this man profs all the time. You know, Ollie North and Fawn Hall have nothing on Ed when it comes to profs. This guy profs morning, noon, and night. I have more notes from Ed than any other person in the company, all total. I have them filed under notes from Mother. It's an easy way to find them. Ed is a aficionado of jazz music in a lot of different ways, and I think John Hand is also that type. Particularly of an artist called Dave Frischberg, who has such beautiful creations such as My Attorney Bernie, Blizzard of Lies, and other famous pieces that he loves to play. His other love is his Toyota Supra. And there's a change of character, you know. You get Ed into that Toyota and go somewhere with him, and it's, let's see, I gotta clean that up. He really pushes it all the way as far as he can. He loves to take corners at 70, every time. Going to lunch with Ed a few times is really a thrill. He's got the jazz playing, the radar detector beeping, you know. It's really something else. Anyhow, I'm going to stay within my 2 minutes or thereabouts. Ed, it's really been enjoyable working with you. I wish I had more time to roast you. Everybody else was kind of conservative tonight, but it's I'm gonna cut it off.
Well done.
Anyhow, I have enjoyed working with you. You've taught me a lot, and you have the ability to see through the fog and all the bull that we mutually have to put up with, and it's been a real pleasure working with you. So thanks very much.
Our last speaker has been selected to fill Ed's shoes, unique and strange shoes when he leaves. And I'd like to ask Don Stouter to come up. Don?
Awful lot of stories have been said here tonight about Ed, and I could probably add some of mine to the work environment. I too have worked for Ed most of my 20 years. I guess about 15 of my 20 years at Douglas, I worked for Ed in one way or the other. However, our friendship, and I call it a friendship, kind of transcended work. We both have, I'm afraid, an affinity for computing machinery. And I use that word in its general sense because it was already noted earlier that Ed started off with a slide rule. I guess I knew him with a slide rule because I worked probably for you for maybe 3 or 5 years before we got into the electronic calculators. But I've always been a follower of Ed. He got, in the mid-'70s sometimes, Hewlett-Packard came out with what they called the HP 65. This was a programmable calculator. You could put in, if I remember right, 128 steps on a little card. And at the time, I had a Hewlett-Packard calculator. Mine wasn't programmable. And up to that time...
You didn't have an apartment house.
That's right. I didn't have an apartment house. I didn't have that extra bucks. I had to wait a while. That's how it's always been. But at any rate, I had to wait a while. And we were able to communicate, but he was way ahead of me with this programmable calculator. So about a year later, because I'm a follower and he was my leader, I bought an HP 65 too. And then we really had something to talk about. We shared programs, and we were going to write a book once. And it was going to be on the use of pocket calculators for various aspects of noise testing. And I believe, I don't know if it was either David or Nancy were taking typing, and they were doing the outline or whatever that first chapter was. And we didn't have word processors then, and they were just starting to take typing. And I guess we got too busy at work, and it was kind of a project that kind of fell by the wayside. But it was pretty exciting. I thought, wow, I'm going to publish a book. You know, it didn't come out that way. So we had a lot of fun with HP 65 calculator. We were in a HP users group. Remember Richard Nelson? Oh, yes. He, today, if this fellow who started this HP calculator users group, he would be a real hacker. I mean, he would be into everything. Ed, on that particular organization, was number 51 or something, and I was 56. I don't know if they called us charter members, but when we kind of went on to bigger and better things, they had over 2,000 in the group. Doggone, though, Ed left me again. Late 70s, he got one of those PET computers, the Commodore PET computer. It was the first kind of computer that had the keyboard and the screen all in one box. And here I was with my dumb little calculator, and he has this computer. Left me again. So he tried to tell me about it, and we really couldn't communicate too well. We did this. This wasn't just at work. In fact, the phone calls and things like this at night have always kind of entered in to our realm of things. Well, about a year later, I got a PET computer. But I had a better keyboard than you. I had a real typewriter keyboard on mine. You had the old membrane type, and I had twice the memory. I had 16,000 characters of memory in my computer. Today, what we have on our desk are 640,000 characters of memory. So we had a lot of fun trading programs and magazines. We started, he would subscribe to magazine A, I would subscribe to magazine B. And that way we didn't have to both pay the rate. We'd change the magazines, and we've been doing that for a number of years. But doggone, as soon as the IBM came out with a PC, he bought an IBM PC, and here I was with this dumb old PET computer. Now I had to catch up, to the chagrin of my wife. And about a year or two after Ed got his PC, I got a PC. But I got a little better one than him because mine was a little newer. And but he right away started adding things to him. But I thought, finally I got ahead of him. I got a hard disk put in mine, 10 megabytes of memory in that hard disk. And I was ahead of Ed. That was great. I was the leader. He was a follower. Then he went and got one, but he got 20 megs about the time I ran out of memory on mine. But we've shared a lot of programs and a lot of experiences on the computer, and we bought some software in Singapore at about a 95% discount. The last Ed heard from the place that we bought, they were moving somewhere else in Malaysia because they had entered into something called copyright laws in that company or country. But we've really had some good times, and I guess we're not going to be talking as often now, but we're going to have to work something out, Ed. I still want to see the Boston Computer newsletter each month, and I know you want to look at Personal Computing magazine. So I enjoyed being your follower, and it looks like I still am. I'm really grateful for that. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Don. Well, Ed, Everybody had a lot of neat things to say about you, and I could only reinforce that. In my brief direct exposure to you over the last 4 years, it's been a very enjoyable and pleasurable experience, and I couldn't say any more than has been said about Ed, his qualities, his influence on my organization, and the help he's given us in doing the tasks we have to do. In appreciation, we have a few gifts here for you, but first I'd like to